Now, new figures obtained by BBC News NI show that there have been almost 50 breaches by Stormont departments during the last decade. That's 50 data breaches. It comes only weeks after the surnames and initials of 10,000 police employees were accidentally published. Our reporter Niall McCracken has been working on this story. He's with us this morning in the studio. Enjoyed himself so much the last time he came in to see us. He decided to come back. Niall, first of all, what exactly have you found here?
Morning, Joel. Well, as you know, we have 9 Stormont departments here, and I suppose what I've been able to find out is during the last 10 years, there have been 48 data breaches recorded by them. I suppose it's important to point out that this might only be the tip of the iceberg, I suppose, as these figures relate to breaches by the departments themselves, and apart from a few cases, they don't provide information on activity by their arm's length bodies. So, for example, the Department of Health, it didn't provide information on any breaches by health trusts, as they are considered separate legal entities and data controllers. But nonetheless, there are still almost 50 data breaches here, and some of them are quite significant.
Can you give us any examples?
Yes, so let's take the Department for Communities, for example. They have breaches which they deemed as major incidents, and you had a file containing sensitive personal information being left in a restaurant. So the Information Commissioner's Office was informed, and the restaurant staff were contacted to protect the file until it was retrieved by staff the same day. Then you also had another incident where there was a possible disclosure of details relating to an individual's former identity. And in this case, staff training was undertaken to prevent further such incidents. Another example is the Executive Office. It had a recent breach that involved an incident where 77 victims and survivors' email addresses from the Truth Recovery Victim and Survivor Consultation Forum were identifiable in a calendar invite. Now, the Executive Office said this was a genuine error, and all forum members were notified of this incident and recognised that it should not have happened and have apologised unreservedly.
And this is probably all the more interesting now because it's so topical.
Yes, Joe, that's right. As many of the listeners will know, details of 10,000 police employees were accidentally included in a Freedom of Information response. This breach and 2 others that were subsequently made public caused considerable concern among PSNI officers and staff who face continuing threat from paramilitaries. PSNI Chief Constable Simon Byrne has since resigned after a number of controversies, including the data breach. And the Department of Justice is also carrying out a review of the policing board, which oversees the PSNI and holds its leadership to account. So meanwhile, the latest figures we've obtained shows that of the 48 data breaches recorded by government departments here since 2013, 13 of them were by the Department of Justice. And this included a letter posted by the Northern Ireland Policing Board to an address that did not arrive. And then you have DOJ's Policing Policy and Strategy Department was also found to have shared information with unauthorised parties. Now, the DOJ said in all cases the incidents were reported to the Information Commissioner, and in most cases the decision was that the incident had been properly handled and no further action was required by them.
It just feels like Northern Ireland is keeping the Information Commissioner's office very busy. And what sort of reaction has there been to this story?
Well, I suppose firstly, the 9 Stormont departments have all said that where breaches occurred, action was taken to ensure information was deleted and further staff training was put in place. And the majority of these cases were all referred to the Information Commissioner's Office, or ICO. As you say, they're all talking about that office. It's essentially the watchdog for data breaches by public bodies. I contacted them with our findings, and the office said people have the right to expect that their personal information is kept safe and handled responsibly, and organisations must have robust measures in place to protect personal information, especially when data is sensitive. And a spokesperson added, "Our Northern Ireland office regularly engages with government departments to support them to get data protection right, so people can feel confident that their information is secure and harm can be prevented. However, where we see behaviour that puts people at risk or harm, we will not hesitate to take enforcement action." And finally, I've also been speaking to one former government watchdog who says the data breaches highlight a worrying trend.
Okay. No, thank you very much.
Well, listening to that is the former Commissioner for Public Appointments, Felicity Huston. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
When you listen to that, and we're talking about almost 50 data breaches, this real concerns about information, Is it something we should worry about, or is it something that people largely will think to themselves, is this really a big deal?
Well, it's 50 reported incidents, but one of them included over 3,500 email addresses, so it's actually, and another one several hundred. It's actually quite a lot of individual taxpayers who are finding the government is not keeping control of their email addresses or whatever other information it is. I mean, everybody has accidentally sent an email to the wrong person, we're all guilty of that. But this is in a league of its own, and I do think there's also a duty on the state to look after our information and not be casual with it.
Yeah, and when you look at this, it is worth pointing out again what Niall mentioned there, that 13 of these were from the Department of Justice. Is there a concern if there's one government department that seems to be particularly stand out in terms of the number of breaches it has?
Well, I think given the sensitivity of the information the DOJ has, that must be an issue, and I'm sure it's the sort of thing the Information Commissioner would be looking at. Was any particular department more guilty of this crime than others? I mean, the other thing is that perhaps, as Niall mentioned, the arm's length bodies that some of these departments oversee, you can't get their information, so there may be all sorts going on in health trusts and things, hopefully not, but there could be, and we just don't know about it. But I mean, you would think of the DOJ, and it sort of rings a bell with what's gone on with the police info. What's going on there.
Yeah, and there are some cases that do make headlines, but as you mentioned there are some of these that involve hundreds or potentially thousands of people and their information. If we are the subject of this kind of data leak or data breach, do we automatically have to be informed about that?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I do know, certainly I remember it some years ago, somebody actually saying to me they had got an email from a government department actually in relation to public appointment, and all the emails for everybody obviously had come in by mistake too. And when they contacted the department to say, you've done this, you might want to address it, the response was quite aggressive. It was a sort of series of, instructions about deleting things, not sharing things, and so on. What it wasn't really was an apology for having shared this person's email with, several hundred other people. I don't know whether they have a duty to do so. One would hope so, but I wouldn't imagine that DAERA wanted to tell 3,500 farmers that they had managed to share their emails around, most of the farming community of Northern Ireland. So indeed, ask the department, see what their duty is, and whether they follow it.
Yeah, I get the impression as well that also all of these organisations, even going beyond government and going to other public organisations and private companies, they have more and more of this information. And, there was a story there Niall mentioned of somebody leaving an envelope inside a restaurant. We've had cases even with the police data leaks recently in which, there have been hard copies of information as well as computers. But the concerns about information being kept online, that is something that it feels that we might be losing a little bit of control of, because all this information is being kept online. Do you think that for businesses beyond even just government, there is now more of a responsibility to ensure that systems are kept secure?
Well, I mean, absolutely. I mean, they have legal duties to protect the data. I mean, the issue with government and all this data is that we don't have a choice. We're all expected to have a government gateway ID and communicate with the state via the internet. I would use as the example, I'm an accountant, so I deal with HMRC. You can no longer personally deal with them in Northern Ireland. They've closed all their offices to the public. Over the summer, they closed their telephone lines as well. So, the only way to communicate with the Inland HMRC is via the internet, and you can imagine the information that you might be supplying them with. They have a duty, therefore, if they're forcing us to work with them like that, they must control the stuff. If a private company, if I was to accidentally give one of my clients somebody else's information, they can leave me. They don't have to stay with me. They have a choice. When we're working with the state, we don't have a choice. So this is where it becomes a real issue. You have to give them that information, nearly always electronically, and this is what's happening. And that's why people get very agitated.
So in simple terms then, Felicity, how worried do you think we should be?
How worried? Well, I mean, as you were sort of inferring, we've almost got used to this stuff going on. That every now and again there's another great story about how BA's lost all its records and all this sort of thing. But we have to be worried because, you never know where it's going to turn up. And I do think we have a right, if we have to share it, to feel that it's being securely looked after. So human error is always an issue. But what happened, for example, the police, that was obviously an initial human error, but it was compounded, it appears, by many other human errors that just should not have happened. Huge amounts of money are spent on data management, data control. Every time we click on a government website, we get all this stuff about the confidentiality of our information, but then it can end up sitting on the top of a car or in a restaurant, and that's really not on.
Felicity, really good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. That is the former Commissioner for Public Appointments, Felicity Huston.
Now, weekend 2 of the Rugby World Cup. Ireland in action again. They take on Tonga in their second game. It's in Nantes on tomorrow night, I think it is, isn't it? Yeah, night games now instead of afternoons.
Yeah.
They'll be hoping for a repeat performance of the opening match when they score a convincing 82-8 win against Romania.
They have sent